Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating and honestly highly misunderstood geopolitical shifts of 18th century India. For the longest time, history has kind of painted this era as just a simple, depressing story of a giant empire collapsing. But as we'll see, the reality on the ground was way more dynamic, incredibly complex, and full of really surprising growth.
So what exactly happens when a massive empire fractures? We're starting with this big question today, to completely dismantle the stubborn misconception that the decline of the Mughal Empire led to some immediate chaotic dark age. Because what actually went down wasn't a sudden plunge into chaos. No, it was actually a profound, sweeping redistribution of power across the entire Indian subcontinent.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the power vacuum, the successor states, the challengers, the golden illusion, and finally, wrap it up with the fatal flaw.
Let's kick things off with part 1, the power vacuum, and the reality of a fading Delhi. So by the early 18th century, the Mughal Empire was simply no longer able to control the vast, sprawling territories it once ruled. I mean, the throne was still there, and the emperor still physically sat on it in Delhi, but the real authority, that was shifting. Ambitious military leaders and provincial governors were looking at this power vacuum and opportunistically stepping right into the void. They started carving out their own kingdoms, which marked the undeniable rise of these powerful regional states that would absolutely dictate the future of the subcontinent.
Moving right along to Section 2, the successor states and their immense wealth and culture. These new power players really forged their own distinct identities. We see 3 major states stepping up, maintaining remarkably strong administrations and building up immense wealth. We've got Hyderabad down in the south, founded by Nizam-ul-Mulk with a notoriously strong army. Then there's Bengal in the east, built on rich trade by Murshid Quli Khan. And up north, Awadh, established by Saadat Khan, which became this massive cultural hub. Let's zoom in a bit on how these former governors paved their own ways. The personal motivation behind this is just absolutely fascinating. Take Nizam-ul-Mulk, for instance. He was a highly important Mughal noble and the governor of the Deccan. Well, he was so completely fed up with the corruption and the endless factional politics in the Mughal court in Delhi that he essentially threw his hands up and established an independent Hyderabad in 1724. Technically, sure, he still formally recognized the emperor, but in practice, the guy ruled completely independently, setting up an incredibly efficient administration over some very fertile land. Meanwhile, over in the east, Bengal shifted its capital to Murshid and just exploded into an absolute economic powerhouse. They were sitting on rich, fertile land and operating out of thriving ports. I mean, just look at these exports: fine muslin textiles, silk, saltpetre, and gorgeous handicrafts. These were globally desired goods. Bengal's merchants accumulated staggering amounts of wealth, which, as you can probably guess, naturally attracted some intense, cutthroat competition from European trading companies who all wanted a piece of the pie.
Up north, Awadh capitalized on its highly strategic position right between Delhi and eastern India. They built up this massive army and a super efficient revenue system. But honestly, what's equally impressive was their cultural impact. Under their rule, the city of Lucknow completely transformed into a thriving, highly refined cultural renaissance center. We're talking a major hub for world-class music, dance, poetry, and breathtaking architecture.
Now, let's look at part 3, the challengers, specifically the Marathas and the Sikhs.
So, building on the brilliant guerrilla warfare foundations laid down by Shivaji back in the 17th century, the Maratha Confederacy started expanding really aggressively after Emperor Aurangzeb's death. They were led by the Peshwas, who essentially transitioned from being just prime ministers to the actual rulers. And they funded their rapid, fast-moving cavalry expansions into places like Malwa and Gujarat through this very specific taxation system called chauth.
And what was chauth? It literally meant demanding 1/4 of the revenue from conquered territories. Think about that for a second. Taking 25% of regional revenues was a massive, game-changing economic shift. This relentless wealth generation, combined with their sheer military mobility, made the Marathas the absolute principal challengers to Mughal authority across all of India by the mid-18th century.
But, and this is a big but, here is their Achilles heel. While the Marathas were arguably the most powerful political force on the map at the time, their long-term unity was severely crippled by these powerful chiefs acting on their own. You had the Holkars, the Scindias, the Gaikwads, and the Bonsleys. They were powerful, sure, but they all had their own separate interests.
Because of these internal rivalries, the Maratha Confederacy was never fully truly united. Meanwhile, over in Punjab, the Sikh community was transforming through a very clear, disciplined evolution. It started with the formation of the Khalsa in 1699. From there, they had to militarize to protect themselves from intense Mughal persecution. Then, as Mughal power faded, they organized into these highly disciplined, decentralized military units known as missals. This incredible courage and tight organization laid the groundwork for what would eventually become one of India's strongest kingdoms.
This brings us to Section 4, the Golden Illusion, or what we might call a fractured Renaissance. Now, at this point, India was no longer controlled by a single overarching empire. It was a politically fragmented landscape made up of regional powers. But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Political division did not mean economic collapse. Let me repeat that. Fragmentation absolutely did not equal a dark age. In fact, it ran parallel to some truly incredible regional growth.
Instead of collapse, what we actually see is a flourishing landscape. We're talking expanding agriculture, highly active trade networks, and rapidly growing cities. Regional courts in places like Pune, Hyderabad, Lucknow, and Murshidabad emerged as bustling hubs of art and literature. It completely flips the script on the whole idea of a declining era. It was literally a vibrant, localized renaissance.
But that leads us right into our final section, Part 5, The Fatal Flaw and How the Door Was Opened.
Because despite all that immense wealth and those thriving cultures we just talked about, these states suffered from some really glaring blind spots. Sure, they had growing cities and riches, but they relied way too heavily on local loyalties and were constantly bogged down by internal succession disputes. And the real kicker, many of them relied on terribly outdated military systems right at the exact moment that European companies were modernizing warfare with highly disciplined infantry and advanced naval strength. Bengal is honestly the perfect example of this paradox. Their immense economic wealth made them an incredibly lucrative target, but their glaringly weak military system made them an eventual victim. This massive imbalance between economic value and military vulnerability was basically an open invitation for foreign intervention.
You see, the rulers in India rarely ever united against common threats. They mostly just formed temporary, fragile alliances. So the British East India Company didn't have to conquer a massive, united Indian empire. Instead, they systematically exploited these regional rivalries. They intervened in local conflicts, supported competing rulers, and smoothly transitioned themselves from foreign traders to political rulers. It was a very calculated strategy.
When we zoom out and look at this timeline, the progression is crystal clear. We go from fading Mughal dominance directly into the rise of these fragmented, wealthy, but militarily outdated regional powers. And it's exactly this political division that paved the way for direct British political intervention.
So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder, long after this explainer wraps up. How easily can a wealthy but politically divided landscape be conquered by a unified foreign corporation? When a region is practically overflowing with resources but totally lacks a unified front, who ultimately reaps the rewards? Thank you so much for exploring this pivotal chapter of history with me today. Keep questioning the narrative, and I'll see you next time.